A long time ago, in a ghetto far, far away, I wanted to become a comic book writer. When I was 4 years old, my older brother Steve, introduced me to comic books, and ever since then, I have been a lifelong comic fan. And it was always my dream, to draw comics when I was a little kid, but I couldn't really draw that well, so I started making the pictures with words. And that's why I became a writer way back when I was a little boy, about 9, 10 years old. I had this figurine, a Mirror Fox figurine, and I just started writing stories around that. And that's how I started writing. And as I got into my teen years and I started reading different comic books, I aspired to be a comic book writer. And I read all about the Marvel Universe, the DC Universe, the histories of the DC Universe and the Marvel Universe, because back then they had the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, those comics, which talked about the histories of the characters, and the history, the who's who of the DC universe. And I would sit there, I would read these histories, really get to know these characters and their backstories. And what I would do is I did all of this because I knew that if you were going to be a writer, you have to do your research. Even back then as a kid, and I wanted to make sure that I had the background in the characters and the history, so that if I ever wrote comic books as I got older, you know, I would just be ready to jump in, because when you're writing cert in the medium of comic books, you have to understand the paradigm and the story models. I mean, the paradigm is a story model. The paradigm for the comic, that you're working on. You have to have a good understanding of because there's two different things. There's the paradigm, which is the model that the character follows, and a story model, which is just a basic format for you know, telling stories in the comic book format. And I really wanted to understand those. So that's why I read so many comics back in the day, because again, I really wanted to just jump in. But as because then after I got after well, I was doing this all the way up until college, and that was my big plan. Was to break in. But I soon found that there was two things that were a barrier to me entering the comic book industry. One was the complete collapse of the comic book industry in 1993. At the time, the industry just completely collapsed. Uh, And I did send one cover letter, and a resume to Milestone Media, but I never heard from them, and the industry just again it collapsed. And two was just it was almost impossible, to get the access to the names of people in the comic book industry, so I could know where to, apply for a job. I mean, in the comic book industry, it's like this. It's like a guarded secret. The contact names, the information. Um, it's very hard for anybody to break into that industry, especially people of color. It's very hard for people of color to break into that industry, because the information that you would need, contact names, to send a query in, or to send a resume and a cover letter, or a writing sample to someone in the comic book industry, you just don't have the names, you just don't have access to the information. And that's one of the reasons why it's just impossible to break in. I mean, I have managed to access other parts of the publishing industry, such as, trade paper publishing, um, and even Hollywood. And a lot of people consider them to be very hard to break into. But I've been able to get access to many contacts, in those industries, by just sending a query letter, or just sending an email. I mean, but when it comes down to the comic book industry, they're like a fortress with a moat, a brick wall, and guards. It's like there is next to no way for a person, even with the background and the skills, to break into that industry. And it was due to the lack of inability for me to get, to the information. I was forced to enter into, start writing fiction instead. And I started learning how to write novels. because it was just impossible to break into the comic book industry. But I've always wanted to write comic books. What a lot of people don't know is that the African American fantasy series I do, ISIS, the ISIS series, was originally planned to be a comic book. I originally planned for it to be a comic back in 1998, 99 when I was doing the concepts for it. Because I was sitting at the dinner table with my family, we were talking about black superheroes, and my sister tells me, why aren't there that many black female superheroes? And then as I was doing research into, the black female characters in the comic book industry, I mean, Marvel, DC, all around, I just did research on it all. And I found out she was right. There weren't that many black female heroines out there, and nobody really, and when the ones that were out there really didn't tell much of a story, and they really didn't have a lot of depth in terms of character development. I mean, as I always saw it, Storm, Vixen, those are the only ones I can know off the top of my head. They really were just ancillary characters. They really didn't do much. They didn't have much of a voice, and they weren't really designed to carry a story. Even with Milestone Media, when it was out back in the day, Rocket, great character, was ruined in the second issue of Icon when they made her into a single mother. It just pretty much killed her character's potential and kept her from growing, to be just as big. Because I believe she could have been just as big as Static, but because Milestone Media made her into this single mother, it pretty much killed her character's growth and development. Um, and I always believed that that it would be great to have an African American female heroine who could carry her own book, carry her own stories, and I figured since no one was making that type of heroine, I would go out and make it. And that's when I started working on ISIS, and I started reading about Egyptian mythology and Nubian mythology, and then I fused it with Black history. And as I was doing the research, I decided, mix it up a bit. Decided she wouldn't be she would be the daughter of Osiris, and we would really go into some commentary about, you know, the family and the black family, and I was gonna really mix some things in there, because I wanted to make it relatable to the modern black family and the issues that many in the modern black family deal with. Today we deal with a lot of black families have broken homes, or they have family, blended families, and all of those issues. And I wanted to explore that with ISIS, and I really wanted to explore, race and race relations, and I really wanted to talk about African American history and African American culture. And these were all important things to me, and I really wanted to put them all together in that story back then. Since then, in the last 10, 12 years, I've been building on that foundation that I established with the first ISIS book that I wrote back in 1999 and then finished and then published in 2002. Um, and I've been trying to build on it and still talk about those same issues when it comes to race, race relations, the African American family, and mixing all that together with action and adventure and making it fun. Because one of the things I wanted to do was make it fun, because I always believe that comic books are the gateway to reading. This is how I learned to read at 4 years old. I pretty much knew who most of the characters were in the Marvel Universe. I could just point to them at 4 or 5 years old because of my brother's comic book collection. And I wanted to, open that door for readers at that age, 4 or 5 years old, because I know that comic books are the gateway to reading for youngsters. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do an ISIS comic book, back then, because I wanted to give little black girls their own heroine, someone they could relate to. Because again, in addition to the superheroes, on screen, there weren't that many black female characters on television either. I mean, even in the movies, Princess and the Frog, we had to wait 20, 25 years for that type of film to even come to the screen. And then even then, Disney doesn't even give us, a black on black relationship like I tried to with the ISIS series, and then in the other fantasy books I do, like The Temptation of John Hayes. I try to promote black on black love, Other concepts like group economics, um, Black Pride, Black History, all that was what I wanted to convey in comic books if I ever got the chance. Those are the themes. The same themes that I put in my books, I planned on putting in comic books, and I planned on exploring. But that was something I always wanted to do. But again, it was very hard for me to find the information to access the market, or even have a name or an address to send somebody, a proposal, um, or even send them a query or a cover letter. You just didn't have I just didn't have access to the information. Even with doing research at the library, research on the internet, all of this stuff is just so hidden. It's just like um, a secret. The information in the comic book industry is just like it's so secret. It's not even funny. I mean, again, I said before, It was easier for me to access the names of publishers and literary agents in the publishing industry, and even to get information about Hollywood production companies, to send them queries, than it is to get a comic book proposal sent to an editor, or even to contact someone about an internship or some sort of entry level position in the comic book industry. I mean, out of all the entertainment industries, the comic book industry is 95% white, and 90 I would even go further and say it's 98% white and 98% male. I mean, there is next to no women or minorities in the comic book industry right now. And I feel that the art form is suffering because of the lack of diversity in the comic book industry. Because we're not seeing, stories related to today and the experiences of people today, because the world has really changed since the peak of the comic book industry back in the 1990s. The most recent peak, because we've had this cycle go through, over the last, I'd say 50, 60 years in the comic book industry. It would peak at one period, then it would fall. Like it peaked in the 40s, then it fell in the 50s, it peaked in the 60s, and then it fell in the 70s. It went all the way up in the 80s, and then peaked in the early 90s, and then it's been in a 22, 23-year slump. And I feel that the thing that's going to help the industry break out of the current slump that it's in is going to be diversity, because the world has really changed. And when you look at most modern comics, a lot of the stories do not relate to, readers all over the world, or readers even in the United States. I mean, people just don't see themselves, their stories, or their experiences in the pages of most modern comics. What they really see mostly, are the adventures of white males having fights with other white males. They don't, see the issues that people of color deal with, and they don't see them in depth, and they don't see, people's experiences today. Like when I write an ISIS series book or an East Team series book, what I try to do is I try to incorporate things like social media, like YouTube, Facebook. Those are big components and plot points in some stories that I do. Um, and they have experiences with this. They carry smartphones. I mean, even though they're Egyptian gods, I mean, New Heliopolitan gods as I call them, they carry cell phones. Um, they deal with social media. They talk to each other through these type of devices, because this is what your kids, this is how they relate to the world. This is how they interact with the world. And what I found from the feedback that I get from readers is that it's very positive, because they're seeing their experiences in a story. And that's one of the things I learned from, reading Stan Lee and Jack Kirby back in the day. They said they tried to make comics relatable to their day, to the times that were going on then when they made Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four. And that's one of the models that I, studied when I was preparing the ISIS series and ISIS stories, back in the late 90s, was that I wanted to make everything, again, I wanted to make everything relatable to the time. And that's again, why I talked about the broken homes and the blended families, because that's what black people are dealing with today. Um, and that's one of the things because I believe when you make stories relatable to people, the readers want to access the material and they feel that there's something there for them and there's a buy-in. They feel that there's an incentive for them to read. I've seen this happen with other stories I've done, like All About Nikki. I made that. I wrote that in a similar fashion. I talk about the family, the home. It's a series. It's a comedy about a rich girl in Beverly Hills, but I talk about the same things, and it's a wildly popular series all over the world. Um, every time I put an All About Nikki book up, it just on Smashwords or I put it up on Kindle, it just blows up. Um, again, because the material is very relatable to the reader, and they identify with the character, and they identify with her experiences, and they see themselves in her. And it's very interesting because All About Nikki stories are really written in a format based in the 1990s, but people all over the world today still can relate to them. Because again, the stories have things going on in them that people see in themselves, and that's one of the things that's very important when you're doing characters, is that the reader has to identify with the character, and they have to identify with see their experiences in the character, and that's something I always try to do when I'm putting stories together. Um, I again, I wanted to do comics, but then I wound up, writing it as a young adult book, and I had a hard time trying to market it, so I had to wind up self-publishing it because at the time there really weren't that many African American fantasy books out there, and the African American fantasy, speculative market was extremely small. And when I tried to sell it to agents and I tried to sell it to publishers like Bain back in the day, it just didn't get any traction. So I had to wind up self-publishing ISIS through the first ISIS book through a POD publisher, and then it did very well in that market. But again, what I really wanted to do was enter the comic book industry back when I graduated college in 1994. But again, the market was dead, and it's still dead. And I feel sad that African Americans still can't access this marketplace or access this medium through the traditional trade publishers. Oftentimes, when black people have to make comics, they have to self-publish, and that's the only way you can get your material out there and get your material distributed. If I ever got a chance, I would love to write comics, but it doesn't look like the marketplace has changed in the last 22, 23 years. And I would have loved to see the marketplace change, and give access to an African American writer like myself. Because I really do believe we need more diversity when it comes to comics. I do believe we need more people, you know, in in the in the bullpen doing the thing, writing the stories or pitching the stories. And I believe it would give people in the comic book industry a little bit more perspective on different experiences and different cultures. I mean, I know that there have been some great black people in the comic book industry, like Matt Baker, who drew the Phantom Lady for Fox Features way back in the 40s. I know about let's see, I think Ron Wilson. Um, he was an artist back in the day. Um, Trevor Von Eden, Dwayne McDuffie, the legendary Dwayne McDuffie, Dennis Cowan, Mark Bright. Um, who else? Daryl Banks, who drew all those great Kyle Rayner Green Lantern issues. Um, wonderful, great artist. Um, there are just so many black people, and I would love to see, be a part of that legacy. And I wanted to be a part of that legacy, but I just couldn't access the market, and the market at the time had just collapsed. And right now, again, if I had the money, if I could just get the funds together, I would do an ISIS comic book or an ISIS graphic novel, um, so that readers could see, all the pictures that are in my head, in full form. When I wrote again, when people read the ISIS series of stories, they say they're just like comic books, and they remind them of comic books. But that's the style I was going for, because originally I planned for ISIS to be a comic book. I planned for it to be, this action-packed adventure featuring the Egyptian gods and Egyptian mythology and African American history. Because the way I see Egyptians and Nubians, they're black people, and because how can Nubia be the sister nation of Egypt, and the Nubians be black and the Egyptians be white? That just always seemed strange to me, and it just seems strange to me because how can one nation be black and the other one be white? I always saw it this way: if the Egyptians said that the Nubians were their sister nation, you know, the Egyptians had to be black. And whenever I do characters like Osiris, I always hear Samuel L. Jackson's voice as Osiris. It's just, and that's just the way I see things. I mean, and then I wanted to do that, for comics, and I really wanted to do those kind of comics. And I try to bring that type of comic book spirit into the ISIS series, and I try to make that, accessible, all ages reading like I grew up with comic books. And I try to try to give readers, that type of reading experience. I mean, I do different types of novels and screenplays, but I have a lot of fun writing the ISIS series, and I have a lot of fun writing these kind of stories. And again, if I had a chance to do comic books professionally, I would definitely take it. I would love to see what my kind of story would be, the reaction to my story from comic book readers, and I would like to, see how they respond to my kind of characters and the kind of adventures I put out there. I've gotten a lot of positive feedback all over the world from ISIS series books, but I always wondered what it would be like, to actually publish an ISIS comic book. And if I had the money, I would definitely make the effort to hire an artist and put together that type of project. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.